Hello and welcome to another edition of TPS Tech Talk. We're joined by a great group of teachers here. I'm so thrilled that we finally have a big group like this to be able to seriously hang out and chat. Again, please submit any questions you have. If you're watching from the Google Plus side, we'll definitely make use of the Q&A app. So feel free to ask any questions there, and we'll address them as we can. And I'm going to keep things short because we got a lot to get through. So I'm going to turn it right over to Amy and let Amy introduce who we have with us.
Thank you, Taylor. So I have the great pleasure of working with the three teachers on today's Hangout on a fairly ongoing basis. They have participated in various events with the Teaching with Primary Sources program at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. They have all integrated primary sources into their teaching for several years. And during that time, they have used available technology to enhance their students' use of primary sources. So to get us started this afternoon, I would like to introduce you to these teachers who work in schools with various types of technology that's afforded to them. So we have Cheryl Best, who teaches 5th grade at Wolfridge Elementary and Junior High School in Bunker Hill, Illinois. She teaches all subjects. Next, we have Tom Bober, who is the librarian at Captain Elementary School in Clayton, Missouri. And last but not least, we have Jean Heil, who is a middle school social studies and science teacher at St. Ambrose Catholic School in Godfrey, Illinois. So I want to welcome all of you tonight and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Amy.
So let's begin with Cheryl in sharing a little bit about your technology use that you have integrated with primary sources.
Okay, first of all, I teach 5th grade in a rural community in Bunker Hill. I have social studies twice a week, 2 times a week for 30 minutes for my class, and then I switch, and then my kids will go for the other 2 days with the other 5th grade teacher who teaches science. And then I have her kids for 30 minutes. So my time is limited because it's at the end of the day. And so when I use primary sources, I have to figure out quick and easy ways to use them. I like for them to have hand copies, but that is not always feasible because our printers, of course, being in a poor rural community, we don't get all the paper and the bells and whistles like others. But I do have a Promethean board, so I find that my Promethean board is really handy. So I will post pictures on my Promethean board and use that as my use of primary sources, especially like today we were talking about the Industrial Revolution in the Gilded Age. Not so much in the early 1800s, but toward the end of the 1800s, after the Civil War and the Reconstruction period. So we've been talking about what about the Industrial Revolution? What does that really mean? So I took 2 different pictures, and I'm going to try to do this slide share. So I'm going to share my picture with you, what I did, and I hope it works. We'll find out. It should be coming up. Can you see it?
Not yet.
And it's right there. Got it?
There you go.
This is one of my first photographs that I showed, and I have the kids do what is on the Library of Congress website, the observe, reflect, and question sheet on this paper, and I have them look and observe. What do they observe? What do they reflect on? What do you think is going on? And what questions they have. So they each have their own, and they would do this. They did this today, actually. And then I pull up another picture, and I try to keep it at 2 because I think too many is just not. It's just too much flipping. So we just take the 2. Did you see the other one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the one with the cigar rollers. And so again, they had to look and see, observe, reflect, and question. And then after we've done that for about a minute for each one. Remember, I've got 30 minutes, so I have to do a quick analysis. And then after that, I have the students, I give them the biography of each. So I give them the source of it, and they find out. I said, now I want you to figure out what makes these two that I've chosen for you, how do they connect to each other? Because I think that's the hardest part, especially in 5th grade, for children to learn how to connect things. So they're looking at these two sources, and they have to figure out what makes them connect. And it was interesting because even today they all thought it was a school setting, and then when they saw the reader, the man on the chair, but I thought that was odd. A teacher wouldn't do that. So then people started thinking, well, that's not a school. It must be a factory. And it was interesting that they thought that. I was really excited that they got that from that. So they started making connections and started using those different observations and things that they were doing. But once I have them do it by themselves, then they have to do it as a group, in a small group. And in my group, in my room, I have tables. I do not have desks. So it's very conducive to collaborating, and the students will collaborate together what they think it is. And then after I passed out the sources, I said, now let's look at the sources. And they were so surprised that it was Cigar Factory. And they got it, they said, wow, in the United States was big in tobacco, so they understood that, and they made the connection to the Civil War that we just talked about, tobacco. So I was really excited about those kinds of things. But when I do primary sources, I do a lot of this kind of setting with the Promethean board, because it's an easy way for me to pull out a source and bring the sources alive for the students without it being printed. I prefer the print, but in this case it works with the Promethean board, especially when it's a quick analysis and a quick connection. So then of course we went in.
Cheryl, real quick, don't forget to stop your screen share just because we're seeing a black screen.
Okay.
I want to make sure people can see
I'm sorry, did it get it?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, and so it became a really good way, and it's inexpensive way for especially a teacher that's in a rural community that doesn't have the technology, because I have one computer, and that's my computer that I use for my Promethean board and I use for my grading. So I don't have the technology that I wish I had, but this works. And then, of course, with the Promethean board, you have the different color pens, so I can always have them do observe with one color and reflect on another color, and ask questions in another color. So that works as well. So you actually write right on the picture. That's a very effective way of doing it as well. So that's one way I do primary sources with technology. Does that help?
Yeah.
Anybody want to pose a question or have any thoughts around that? Again, keep it pretty free form, and feel free to chat throughout these.
I think that Cheryl has another benefit that's going on there, in that you've got a nice option for collaboration when you've got things up on that smartboard or the Promethean board or whatever it is that you're using. And so even though the print is nice, you've got that collaborative aspect of a whole class collaboration. And I know you're with older elementary students, Cheryl, but when I'm working with K1-2, I almost exclusively have things up on our smartboard because of that element, because everybody gets to bring the message together and kind of build upon observations and build upon reflections and build upon questions.
That's a very good point, Tom. I like that idea of building, because I think that you can stray too much when it's individual. They can get off on a tangent that doesn't have anything to do with the source. So when you do have that Promethean board, you can direct it a little easier, but also build upon other people's thinking. They always amaze me what they come up with when they start looking at those sources And I thought, well, I didn't even notice that. So I like the idea of building. I think that's a great point. Thanks, Tom.
I generally will start almost every activity that I use primary sources with as a whole group. So I'll have sort of a teaser primary source that I might find that's related to the topic. And then we do that as a whole group using, I have a smart board, which is essentially a Promethean board. And I like to start as a whole group, and then often we'll come back as a whole group after we do individual activities with other aspects of technology. But it's a wonderful tool. It truly is to get their juices going, so to speak, and to really, launch them off into further investigations. So I think all of us use that. That's a key tool.
And I think also it's important that you pick the right source. You have to have a source that has lots of stuff going on in the photograph, especially if you're going to use photograph, because if you just pick a person, it kind of loses the whole point of it. I like to pick sources that are that have lots of stuff going on and not necessarily in my face what I know, like the reader. I didn't know that cigar factories would often, and a lot of factories would often hire somebody to read to the whole factory because that was their way of educating people of the time, because there were so many children working in the factories, and I found that very interesting. So I always like to pick sources that have lots more than just a meaning, but have lots of meaning to it, or lots of things going on.
The other thing with using the smart board or the Promethean board that it allows you to do with those pictures that have a lot of engaging elements to them is you can start to isolate elements of the photo better than if you have photos in front of every student, print photos, and ask them to focus in on certain areas. You can start to focus the student's attention in on that smart board in one area and then start to reveal more and more and more, or move from area of the photo to area of the photo. Another way to get some interesting observations and focus those students' attention.
Very good.
Those are really all great ideas. So that kind of leads me to Tom, because you go a little bit deep. You've used different technologies other than the Promethean board. I mean, obviously everybody's used the Promethean board or smart board. So could you share a little bit of other technologies that you've integrated beyond the Promethean board and smart board?
Probably the one that we are working with the most now, and I say working with the most, but we're really kind of exploring and playing with, is just the idea of using the e-books that the Library of Congress offers. And we've done some work with that when we were able to make some direct connections to the curriculum, and I'm working with K through 5. They've got some nice e-books that have sets of primary sources we're able to target in. I find when I do use those, since there are over a dozen primary sources, usually I ask students to focus in on specific ones and don't just, at that age, let them just have a free-for-all through there. But along with some targeted directions, ask them to go ahead and look at those primary sources that are available. A lot of them are more image-focused. And the other thing that I like about those is, similar to the smartboard, you can annotate on the image itself. So similar to what a teacher is able to do, each student is able to do individually, and start to highlight and point out things that they're noticing that they want, if they want to come back to those later. They're also able to pinch and zoom on the images, and so you can get a great amount of detail on some of these primary sources that you wouldn't be able to do unless you printed it out extremely large, which can be a bit of a hassle. And so there's a lot of benefit to that we've found, as students been able to focus in on some of these sources and see some detail they wouldn't otherwise be able to see. I use them in collaboration with the print sheet, where students are recording their observations and their reflections and their questions, but you can do that within the ebook itself as well. Those are available for free through the iBook store on the iPads. You can also download them and use them on a Mac itself, and we have tried that just to try it. It's a little clunkier, but using them on an iPad, we just had nothing but positive results. And it makes me wonder, I know you can go through, and this is something I want to explore over the summer, I know you can go through and, anyone can go through and create their own ebooks. I'm wondering if you could take LOC images and incorporate them into your own ebook that you would use with students. So essentially create your own source sets in that way. So it's something we're going to play around with, but the Library of Congress has a great resource there, and I'm hoping that they continue building upon them.
Yeah, we would certainly second that sort of positive, bit of feedback on those. What were discovery sets? Is that what I'm trying to think of? Is that the same thing we're talking about?
Yep.
Is that what the too? And we've both played with them. And sorry, we didn't actually introduce, but yeah, Keith and I are both from TPS at MSU. But yeah, we've had I think they're just so simple, and that's what makes them so powerful. So I'm seconding your advocacy of them for sure.
Yeah, and this is Keith. Nice to meet everyone. I just wanted to kind of put in there that I sat in a meeting with some of the outreach staff from the library, and they're planning on pretty much taking all of their primary source sets and turning those into ebooks. So they've had really good feedback from teachers, from people like you guys here, and so they're planning on rolling that out and continuing that as they roll out new materials, and they're going to be putting the old stuff into these discovery sets. So that's good news for all of us.
Do they only work, though, on Macs?
I believe so, but somebody may know more better than I do. I think as long as you have an iBooks account or an iTunes account, you can get them that way. I'm sure there's workarounds for those of us who are not Mac people, but Mac or iPad people. But
I would imagine that they're looking at doing different formats. I know that on Twitter, at least, they alluded to that, but I think as of now, they're in that iBooks format and only in that format.
I apologize. I have a bumblebee in my office. I knew it was going to come back out. Eventually, I tried to get it with a trash can. I'm sorry.
We need the bird and the bee to come together and
I was going to be discreet about it, but anyway. So if I run off again, that's why it's chasing me. So Tom, I wanted to ask, when you had the iPads, you had the ebooks on the iPad with your students when they came into the library. Were they grouped, and they had one per group? Or could you kind of share a little about the activity itself or the setup of it?
Yeah, sure. I'll share. We've done it a few times with a couple different sets, and so probably the one I talk about most, though, is boy, I wish I'm struggling with the ebook, but it has to do with the understanding the solar system or understanding the cosmos or the universe, and I'm searching for the exact name, but it eludes me. We do have a class set of iPads, and so we were able to put iPads in the hands of every student, and we were asking them to look at models of the universe. And so I had already gone through and identified heliocentric models of the universe and geocentric models of the universe. And there were 4 or 5 examples of each, I would say, within the LOC set. Students at each table of 4, 2 of them had a heliocentric model, 2 of them had a geocentric model. And I didn't tell them what model they had. I just said, you have a model of the universe in front of you. Let's go ahead and analyze that particular model you have, and no one at your table has the same one, so don't worry about what they're doing. You're going to get a chance to come back together. This is one of the few times I do let them analyze alone, because they are going to come back together and discuss. I like that collaborative aspect of it, and I think it's important. Students were noticing some of those elements that were key to them being either heliocentric or geocentric, and they came back and I said, okay, well, half of you have a heliocentric model and half of you have a geocentric model. Does anyone know what those words mean? They didn't. I said, well, go ahead and try to figure it out. Compare, contrast what your different observations are, what you were thinking, what questions you have, and see if you can figure out not only what the words mean, but what model each of you individually has. And they worked together for maybe 10 minutes tops, and then we reported out group by group. We had about 5 groups and in each class, and I was really impressed at the not only that they were able to understand and come to some definitions of those words that were absolutely correct and they were able to identify, but some of the reasoning that they used was really impressive. They really used those details in the photographs. They were looking at our images. They were looking at images that were in different languages, but they were able to decipher enough of the word to start to make sense of what they were looking at, and they were using those kind of Latin root words to get to some meaning of the geo and the helio and those types of aspects. And so it was really a nice extension activity for the science unit that was already going on. This was with a group of 5th grade students. But that's essentially what that specific activity looked like.
No, thanks for sharing that. And so Jean is really lucky. This is her 3rd year of having an iPad one-on-one, and so you've been sharing a lot this year. How you've been integrating primary sources with the use of your iPad and the different apps. So if you could just share a little bit, because I think you're taking it even just one step further. You're middle school, so to gain your perspective would be nice.
Yes, thanks, Amy. I just this year used to start with where Tom was, and then I'll keep going. But I used the ebook on immigration, and there are actually 22 sources. And so what I did is I assigned each one of my students a number, and they were responsible to use, dig into that number, and then they spent some time individually seeing what that primary source had to do with immigration, what they can learn from it, and then we, did a sort of, jigsaw and kind of taught each other and tried to make connections and how do these all fall into this category of immigration. And so it was a great experience, and it was about as easy as you can get as far as teacher prep goes, because they just loaded the book on, had that on their iPads, and I gave them a number and said go, and it was a really enriching experience for them. So I'm looking forward to more opportunities to use more of those that the library is putting out, because they kind of do all the really hard work in finding all the sources for us, and that's pretty cool. I am very excited to be able to teach one-on-one iPads or in that environment, and I work very hard at incorporating 21st century skills into every aspect as much as I can into my classroom. And so I kind of just sort of went through and kind of, there's all sorts of C's, the letter C that you can go with technology integration, but the ones I really focus on in my classroom are creation and allowing kids to be able to use the technology, pairing with primary sources and create something to show their learning and to show what they're doing. And also, with regards to the primary sources specifically, using the Library of Congress website to curate and to be able to search and to find things that will support and connect to what we're discussing in class and all the historical topics, and really increases their ability to think historically and critically. And then connection, I'm a connection, that's just me. All my colleagues know I'm always talking about how this connects to them, how this connects to me, and so forth. So the creation piece, I do a lot with my students. They have an app called Notability, and that app allows, basically I find primary sources that I want them to analyze on the Library of Congress website, and I basically put them into a PDF format. And then they are able to open them in Notability, this app Notability, and it's a lot like the ebook, so they can make it bigger, make it smaller, they can write on it, they can circle things, they can add text, they can add notes, and they really get to kind of really dig into, digest that primary source, and then it's all saved as a PDF file, so all their notes and their drawings and their comments, and it's a really cool piece, and then they can even email that to each other and collaborate on, hey, this was my source, this was your source, what, how are these connected? So I really enjoy doing that. I also, in my 7th graders particularly, I've been working with this year as far as curating, helping them be able to curate those and search for those primary sources on the Library of Congress website themselves, finding those primary sources, and then actually putting together their own Prezi or keynote presentation. I've introduced them to haiku, so they're really working with their iPads and the primary sources, and essentially they're kind of sort of ending up making their own ebooks in a way, as they're working together and saying this primary source hooks to this primary source, hooks to this fact, hooks to this question that I have, and then they have an opportunity to present that to each other. We have Apple TVs in our classrooms, so basically they just mirror their iPad onto my smartboard, and then they are able to present and share all of the things that they have discovered and learned with one another. So that whole cooperation and collaboration piece is reinforced once again. And then a really fun thing, I'm a pretty dramatic person. It's just how I am. And so I love using drama, and I love getting kids actively involved in learning and thinking and trying to get the point of view of people who were there at the time. And so one really fun, very popular thing that I like to do with kids is I will put up a primary source, or I may give a group, different groups, a certain primary source, and instruct them to make a 3-minute to 5-minute iMovie where they have to act out what happened right up to the moment that's captured in the photograph, and then what happens in the next 2 minutes afterwards. And so they basically they pick characters in the picture. Oh, I'm going to be this guy, and I think he's this, and I'm going to be this lady, and I think she's thinking this. And then they basically script all based off of a photograph or some type, or a political cartoon, something that can lend itself to that. And they work on those in groups, and then, of course, once again, have an opportunity to present and share that. And all of this is, I mean, it just, between the technology and it just, sisters, it really works well with primary sources, and allowing students to dig around the Library of Congress and feel confident that they can find things that really do support what we're talking about. And hey, Mrs. Howe said that, and the textbook said that, but here's this says this, and learning that those primary sources really do have an important voice and an important piece in understanding our history. And so those are just some of the things that I have done, and I'm always trying new things. I'm always I'm not a techie at all. I don't understand how it works. But what I do understand is that kids are lit up and they're highly engaged when I'm crazy enough to try something and crazy enough to let them try something. And that to me is that's just the beauty and joy of educating at all, is seeing those kids really dig it and really get into it. And so those are just a few things that I've done.
I want to go to your class.
You can come anytime. You know that. Open door.
I would love to. I'd love to do that acting out thing. I think
Oh,
that
yes.
so much fun.
You and I would make an awesome team. That would
We would.
Yeah.
So as I hear all these, we know that technology can increase engagement and get the kids all excited. And I've even heard Cheryl even talk about the excitement that kids have. I've even heard of a high school teacher. He said you put a folder of documents in front of them and they just grumble like, it's just another DBQ. But if you give them an interactive, like one of the exhibits, I'm thinking of like the Lewis and Clark presentation that's in the teachers page at the Library of Congress that has all the different documents that along the way of their travel. I mean, he was really that high school teacher was excited to use that with his students because they had snippets. So there were excerpts that linked to the larger one. Actually, Cheryl, I think you've even used this presentation with your students. So, it's kind of accommodating for the lower grades, upper elementary, to do some research with documents, a lot of documents and sources. Gives them choices. When you have it digitally, it's not so cumbersome, and then they're excited to go through it. But that high school teacher said they were more excited and went through more documents online through an exhibit than they would have in a folder to answer a question. So I do like the engagement factor that everybody's talking about. I think kids get excited about it. We see that it can be really useful working with those digital primary sources. But has anyone experienced some challenges that they might want to share and how they might have overcome those challenges or something to that?
I think.
Go ahead, Tom.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think that's something that we run into occasionally, and it is especially with that example of the iPads. It luckily didn't happen in the example I gave, but when I've used them with younger students, and maybe it's because, unlike Gene, we're not a one-to-one. There is a class set in the building, and so it rotates around. There's a novelty factor, I think, that sometimes can be a bit of a distraction, and so I think finding that balance between the engagement level and the novelty factor, and figuring out how those two are going to play off of each other is something that I think about a lot of times when I'm trying to make a decision. Am I going to utilize technology when incorporating these primary sources, or am I going to try to go a more paper-pencil route when utilizing the primary sources? And that's the other thing I think was thinking about with Gene's example of using the ebooks that I was wondering about, and Gene, maybe you can share, is this idea of utilizing the entire ebook with regard to students also recording their information in there as opposed to using the primary source analysis tool, paper pencil version of that. And so
a question came in I wanted to make sure we addressed kind of while we're talking challenges. Mary had asked, were teachers surprised that you had used primary sources in the sciences? What kind of feedback from a colleague sort of perspective have you gotten on integrating science using primary sources?
I can speak briefly. We've done it in 5th grade specifically, and 3rd grade specifically, and I wouldn't say they were surprised. I would say that they really found it engaging, and they found it to be an interesting avenue to take, kind of outside of the normal science instruction that they were expecting. And so we have all of our grade levels either are teaching a science unit or a social studies unit at a given moment, and they are not in sync with each other. So we may have one teacher doing a science unit and another 2 teachers doing a social studies unit. Those 5th grade teachers, when they heard about that particular science lesson, they said, when we come to that unit, make sure you do that with our students too. So there was definitely some positive feedback that the teachers had off of it, and they were interested in how it worked.
Tom, I think with regards to the question you asked me as far as the kids using the interactivity of the iPad is, I think it makes a huge difference. That's where my kids, that's where my middle schoolers are. Obviously, they all have an iPad all day long at school. So this is something that it's not a novelty for my kids much anymore, because it's just they understand it's a tool that they use all day long. But as far as the flexibility of being able to, oh, I have a quick, I got to remember this, or I can put this over here, or I want to circle this point on this primary source because I want to remember that that picture reminds me of, you know, they can do a lot more, almost like the mind mapping kind of note taking. There's a lot more freedom in that. Notability, when I make the primary sources PDF, has almost all of those same options as well. They can use text, they can draw, they can add their own photos, they can, you know, upload all sorts of other information, they can have links, and I just came across a new app, even just today. It's called Explain Everything, and it looks a lot like that ability to kind of bring in all those pieces right there in one place. So I'm kind of excited to try that out. But I think we're really fortunate that my kids can have that, and they feel much more comfortable. And I think in fact, I know for a fact, because I was doing primary sources before I had iPads, and the primary source tools are a great place to start when that's what you have, with the observe, analyze, and question, the Venn diagrams, all those kinds of graphic organizers. But boy, when they can do it right on the source itself, and I think that's very valuable.
Do your students, can I ask, and I'm getting a little more towards the tech side, but I'm just hearing all of this interconnectedness, which I think is really the key word, you know, to link that primary source not only to their own ideas, but then to these outside pieces as well. Do your students have keyboards tied into their iBooks so that the documenting is done in a faster pace, I guess?
They are not, a keyboard is not required. And so I would say I have about 120 kids. We probably have 60% of our kids have keyboards that go with our iPads. Yeah.
Wow. What grades, Jean? Oh, is Cheryl asking a question?
No.
Oh, okay, sorry. What grades, Jean, do they start having the one-on-one in your school?
6th, 7th, and 8th grade, our middle school grades.
Okay.
And next year, our next 5-year plan is to roll out classroom sets for 5th grade down, so that they won't take their iPads home like our middle schoolers do and bring them back every day. But each class, we're hoping over the next by 2020, that our whole building will have iPads, basically. We'll have enough for everybody all the way down to kindergarten.
Oh, how nice.
Yeah.
So there's a question from one of our viewers, Mary Johnson. Are any of your kids not engaged by the technology? If not, why do you think that is the case, and how do you handle it? And this goes to anyone.
I don't know that I've ever seen, I mean, the novelty factor that I mentioned, but besides that, I don't think there's ever been an issue where technology has been a hindrance or something that students weren't engaged in. I think that engagement factor is second nature at this point for exactly the reasons Jean was saying.
Can I answer that question? Because you guys have it, we don't. And when we do, we really don't ever get to have what you guys have, ever. And so it was really funny when we did the Lewis and Clark one that Amy was speaking of. I could not get my students on that site that would work in my building because we do not have the broadband width to use it. So Amy, God bless her soul, downloaded all the little files in a folder for my kids and tried to put it on my laptop. So now all the kids had to do was use that, and you would have thought I would have gave them gold just because it was on a folder on a laptop. So they had a technology, sort of, kind of, but not like the real thing, but even just being able to flick on that folder on a laptop was a big deal. So, you know, you say novelty, but for us, I wish we had what you had, because, oh my goodness, you get to do so many more things that my kids would be so excited to do, because they do know how to use it. They do at home, but when we come to a school that doesn't have that technology, we lack that. But even still, even just being able to flick that little folder up and something pops up, they were, weren't they, Amy? You were there.
I know they were.
Can I just speak to? I don't have issues with kids not being engaged by the technology, but I will say that I do have times where kids will wander off and open an app or open a game that they do have on their iPads that, you know, will, you know, and that's the temptation to open that and, you know, strive away. So really how I handle that is I keep them busy. It's what we do as teachers. I mean, you know, you overplan. You know, if you think this is going to take 10 minutes, you know, you plan 3 things to take 10 minutes just in case, you know, and I keep things moving. I have lots of different techniques. You know, I do a 3-minute pause, or I'll do a 3-2-1, or I'll do, you know, there's lots of times where I will say, okay, stop and tell your partner what you just found, you know, or you know, pick someone to share out to the class. So hopefully they're, you know, staying engaged because they're excited about it, and if they're not that excited about it, they're staying engaged because they know Mrs. Howe's going to call them out. So that would be probably my biggest challenge, and honestly it doesn't happen too often because I do keep them incredibly busy, and that's really the key. With lots of pieces to each activity. But I don't find that they're not engaged with the technology. They're excited to use it. Even though they get it every day, they still are excited to be able to use it.
I think that Cheryl had a great example, and I think, Jean, you kind of hit on it too, in a sense of using that term overplanning, this idea of what happens if the technology doesn't work. I mean, that's the bigger concern to me, as opposed to students not being engaged with the technology. And so I've done that very thing, Cheryl, with downloading things just in case they do not come up. If they're not down, you know, the ebooks are downloaded in that particular example, but if we're on a desktop or we're on a website that's linking to primary sources, I have those images downloaded just in case. And when the first time I used those ebooks, I spent easily 30 or 45 minutes trying to break it. What's every possible thing a student might do in this situation, and how can I, you know, is everything going to work, or how do I get them out of a jam if they get into a jam? So I think that element of planning is when we talk about challenges with technology and primary sources, for me that's the challenge, is what if the technology doesn't work at that moment?
Because our time is getting short, I was wondering if everyone could share like one final thought that you can share that would help others who use primary sources and see the value of it and enjoy it, and if they were to how you could encourage them to use technology, or maybe a tip. There's one takeaway or tip that you could share with our audience. What would it be?
My one thing would be try something. Just try something. Just say, okay, this is a great lesson I have that I use primary sources with. What's one way that I can incorporate technology, and just try that. Try one thing at a time. I didn't do all these things the first year I had iPads, or the second year that I had iPads, and next year that I teach with iPads, I'll be doing other things. So just try one thing. Take a chance. Know it might not work. Regroup, learn from it, and then try again. But my tip is just try.
Good tip, Jean. Good tip.
Thank you.
I like it. My one tip is allow reflection time, because I always think that sometimes that idea of technology can get too much, and we still need that time to reflect. That, yes, you have that primary source and it's wonderful, but you got to give them time to really just reflect. And I find that teachers, especially now that we just so, 30 minutes, boom, 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 too much, too fast, take time to reflect, because I think you're going to find that they really are thinking and that those sources are allowing them to think, but you got to give them time to express that. So just reflect.
You have a feathered friend that was agreeing with you, I think.
Yeah, bird.
I think my one tip would probably really, in my mind, incorporate what both Jean and Cheryl said, and that is to find that work towards finding that sweet spot where technology really enhances what you're doing with the primary sources. There are times where, and I do this as well, it is just a matter of convenience, and so I'm going to utilize technology, but it doesn't necessarily enhance what I'm doing or what my students are doing. And so are there moments that you can really, when you're looking at that, I mentioned that high definition map, and you can zoom in and get that detail that you couldn't get if you were printing this out. To me, that's an enhancement that you're not going to get with paper and pencil, and so the use of technology there really heightens what students are able to do with that particular primary source. And so, and some of the things that Jean was saying with regard to incorporating all these different note-taking elements. I mean, you're hitting a sweet spot there in my mind. And Cheryl, when you're talking about on the Promethean board and you are writing down the observations and the reflections and the questions in different colors, to me, that hits a sweet spot, because I know my students struggle with that. Like, they have these great thoughts and ideas, but is it an observation or is it a reflection? And so if I can model that, or if they can do that on their own, like Jean, if they have their own device, that's a great incorporation of technology. So look for those sweet spots and capitalize on those.
Well, I want to thank all of our teachers today for sharing with us and sharing. And now the whole world gets to hear what I hear all the time when I get to talk with you guys. So, Taylor and Keith, I also want to thank you for allowing us to be here and setting this up for us.
Yeah, we reiterate the same thing. Thank you all for being here. And again, we plan to do a number of these TPS Tech Talks as often as the topics allow. We have another one coming up on podcasting not too far out, so follow TPS Tech Talk, that hashtag on Twitter. We'll keep that pretty active. In the TPS Teachers Network, who I know some of you are a part of, there's a lot of activity there around these Tech Talks. So yeah, I want to say thanks as well, and Amy for facilitating, and for anyone who wants to join in this capacity or has an idea, definitely get in touch with myself or Keith or anyone at TPS, and we can get one of these set up to share great ideas that we know are everywhere when it comes to TPS. This is a small sample. You guys are stars, but we know this happens across the country, so it's great to get some of this out there.
Thank you, and thanks for the viewers.
Thank you.
We covered a lot of ground. We got technology, primary sources. We got birds and bees.
Yeah. Perfect Tech Talk.
I couldn't help myself. All right, we'll sign off. Thanks until next time, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Bye.